And we're live. And by live, I mean pre-recording in case I make any mistakes. I can edit it down because I
There we
do
go.
that sometimes. Tim Swanson. Hey, man, thank you so much for joining us today. Swanson, Swami? Is it
Samsonite. I was way
Sam-
off.
Yeah, I couldn't resist. One of the things we were just talking about before we recorded was going into what the world is we want to leave the next generation. And the name of the show is After I'm Dead. This has nothing to do necessarily with us or myself or how this is going to impact me as much as it is the next generation. And one of the things that we have a major problem with is an eroding middle class and the inability to build wealth and take a step out of poverty, or take a step in from low income to lower middle to lower middle
Right.
to middle
To actually
to
be
middle.
on a journey. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so there's this thing that has happened where I think a lot of times we see government programs that are, I think, that comes from the right place of like wanting to solve a problem where it's affordable housing. But if you can afford something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll ever have ownership over it. And if you don't have ownership over anything, then you can't build wealth. You can't build generational wealth, certainly. And also, you won't ever like really care about what you have because you don't physically take ownership over it. And
It's
so
all those other social, cultural, economic points of view that come because of ownership,
right.
or allowed to because of. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and just to quick tee up, and I'm going to turn this over to you to give us a breakdown of Inherent Homes. What Tim is doing, he's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met, and he's working on a project to create attainable housing, not affordable housing, but he's taken a kind of a factory line approach to eliminating a lot of the fat and a lot of the excess from the manufacturing of a home to be able to deliver a home in 2 stages rather than 12 to 18. And as a result of that, he's eliminated a lot of the costs. Therefore, the barrier to entry to own a home is significantly lower, which is something that's so incredibly important to get out of poverty, to get into another stage of wealth, to slowly be building that. And actually, one of the partners that is a funder for you told a wonderful story about the first house that he bought, holding on to it and selling it. And all of a sudden he had $30,000 and he's never had that money before. And he's like, well, I can put this money into something else. And that snowballed into something pretty big, and he's worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars now. So if you start small and you build on it, you can do something wonderful, like get out of what feels like institutionalized poverty and a world that won't let you out of where you've been born into. So I can't wait to have this conversation. Tim, thank you so much for doing this. I know we've talked about it for a while. Without further ado, Tim Swanson from Inherent Homes. Tell us about what you're doing. Tell us about, besides what I just said, I don't want to tee it up too much, but I'm very excited about this project because it means getting people out of poverty, which is like a really big freaking deal.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm really grateful to continue this conversation with you, to be part of this conversation right now. That exact thing. When we start to have a conversation about the human condition, right? You and I have talked about this a little bit, right? It's not that we have a housing crisis in our country, which we do, right? Or a workforce crisis in our country, which we do. I think broadly, it's neither of those, right? It's a humanity crisis. If we start to see that, like, the human condition, if we can kind of equalize the human condition, or at least accept that there should be a path, whether or not somebody takes it, but there should be a path if someone chooses to be able to advance and accelerate through. We kind of tend to lose that, and we've lost that a little bit as a society. We sit in a consumer-driven economy where we've started to strip away anything that the consumer actually can do and carry. And so for us, that's where housing is so important. Housing is one of those foundational pieces that gives you that launch pad for lots of other things. We have done historically in our country, especially in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, we had programs and structures that were all about that American dream, that American path, that American chance, right? And we've slowly transitioned those from ownership models to rental models. And not just to rental models, but specifically in safety net housing and affordable housing. We've shifted those to sort of perpetual poverty-based models where I can't actually, if I wanted to get out and sort of improve my life condition, I hit a certain threshold where I make too much money to be able to have that subsidized housing, but I can't yet compete in the market, right? So the market is really up here, and the subsidies right down here, and there's a lot of people, more and more and more, wandering in the middle, either overextending to go this way or self-limiting, frankly, and sort of leaning back in so that I don't lose this safety net that I actually have. And
Yeah.
that's not what it should be, right? Um, and when we look at sort of swirl that out a little bit bigger, and I promise we'll talk about inherent homes and actually sort of the building stuff, but it's really important to talk about, all right, if we can think about value and wealth creation for an individual or a household, right, and start to answer the questions around there, then yeah, I'm going to build a house differently or deliver it differently or solve that differently. But I'm also going to start to unpack what happened to the sort of finance models, debt models, mortgage models, sort of opportunity models that allowed for generational wealth creation through real estate and homeownership, to your point. And where have we lost some of those parts and pieces? What happened to the other constructs and structures that limited? We sit here in Chicago, where we continuously have this challenge around schools and not enough people in those public schools. Well, that's because a lot of our neighborhoods have 40, 50, 60, even 70% vacant land, right? Used to be housing, used to be vibrant economies, but there's only so much that $1 can be spread thin until you
Mm-hmm.
rebuild and restore that fabric. And so that almost ultimately is what Inherent's about, this belief that a stability around homeownership. So not even getting to wealth creation, right? But that certainty that I can put my head down at night, not nervous about where my house is going to be or where I'm going to live or where my family's going to be 1 month from now. What that unlocks in the human potential and human brain to do more with what has been given to oneself. If I'm not making that sort of, do I pay my utility bills or grocery bills, right? Like this is a duality that more and more Americans and global citizens actually face, where we are sort of cut down to the core. And so for us and for me, I don't care if you're from the north or the south or the east or the west, which color or animal you vote for in elections. I don't care race, creed, color, religion. There's sort of a general underlying. You put in a hard day's work, you should be able to have a restful night. And
Yeah.
and that sort of simple statement sort of is the underpinning, the undergirding of this idea that we can actually do good and do well through housing and housing solutions.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important when you were earlier about self-limiting. And this is a thing that it's like negativity begets negativity.
That's right.
When you get into this place of like, you know what, I can't even afford a house. I'll never afford a house. I'm not even going to bother. You start to make different decisions because it's like, well, one day I can, if there's a finish line that you can at least see, if I save up enough money, I can own a home. That is something that you'll actually work toward. But if you feel like you can't ever get there, then you're like, well, screw it. Doesn't matter. And then why even try? And then you get into this a different pattern of behavior where you're not saving money ever because you don't think there's ever a reason to do it. And then you just kind of get into a paycheck to paycheck mentality. And then you can find yourself with really bad spending habits and finding yourself economically, putting yourself in a place economically where if something did happen, there's job loss, you get sick, whatever, you have no safety blanket. Or no safety net, excuse me. And so I think what you're doing, and again, like this, the impact of creating wealth for all of the things that we talk about, especially in politics, especially here in Chicago with the illustrious mayor that we have, with the crime issues that we're having, with, and I've talked about this with you before, it's like getting people out of poverty means that they will be able to do and focus on other things. How many people talk about climate change and how we should be focused more on that? If you don't have the basic necessities of life,
right?
You're worried about whether or not you're going to have food for the week. You can put gas in your car. Are you going to make it to work? Taking public transportation,
right?
Making sure your kids have food instead of you. If these things are of your concern, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Are you ever going to give a shit about anything that big?
How could you
macro?
possibly?
How could you possibly? So
right.
it's
I'm
like
just trying to get to Friday this week,
right?
And you're asking me to save my planet. I'm just trying to save my kid through the weekend to get him back to school on Monday.
Right. And so it's like if we have all these cultural, and I hear this all the time from our politicians, but we saw it over within COVID. It disproportionately impacted incomes of low income communities. Same thing with crime. It disproportionately impacts low-income communities. Education disproportionately impacts low-income communities. Climate disproportionately impacts low-income communities.
Fill
Gee,
in the blank.
I'm starting to see a pattern here, and it's like, well, if all these things disproportionately impact low-income communities, rather than trying to take a siloed approach to all of these, maybe, just maybe, we should try to get people out of poverty. Is that a thing? Is that something we could do? And I go a little nuts with this. I don't have these conversations a lot with people, but this is ultimately the point of this show is like, can we start to have a different conversation about how to fix these problems in the aggregate? And I think part of the way we can do this is by providing an actual pathway out of being in a low income, wherever you're born into that situation that I mentioned earlier. And I think housing, I've seen it with myself. I know it works. I've seen it with other people. I've got friends that have they started small, buying places, and they sold it. And they bought another place and sold it. They've gotten a remodeling. They started flipping places. They've made 7 figures doing that. Like what a one, and it didn't happen overnight. It was over a period of a decade. But it's like you have to start somewhere. But for a person like that came from, both his parents were teachers. One was a gym teacher. Like he doesn't come from some a fancy silver spoon background. So it's like, but it was
opportunity.
Exactly. And it all happened through housing. So I'm looking at ways that we can do this. And I think this is a massive solution. So I want to talk about how you're doing, not to secret sauce. I don't want to get into any of that stuff, but just can you give us a high level? Because again, I want to get the word out about what you're doing. I want to help spread it in Chicago. I know I'm looking at other places outside of living in just Chicago. But it's like, how do we get this to expand to other urban areas, other cities like Chicago or smaller or even larger, because this is not a problem that just exists here. This is a problem that affects everybody on the planet. And I think you guys could very easily, once this gets proven out, you could very well be like the Model T of Ford, of being able to get housing into the market and actually help build wealth and lift people out of poverty.
That's it. And I'm grateful for you framing it that way, because you're getting right to the heart of it, right? You and I have talked about this in the past. We may be the first generation where this idea of leaving it better for our next generation is a misnomer, right? Unless we address some of these pieces. Like, am I giving my children a better opportunity than I had, right? Jury's out right now, especially with some of this radical wealth inequality and separation, isolation. This is not something that is hyper local, although our work is hyper local. We'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
You said something really important too. For me, there's no secret sauce, and that's the fundamental issue. The secret sauce is the obvious, right? It's the inherent view of reality, if I could sort of play on that, because for 2 reasons. One, because nothing that we're doing is unique or special or wild. It's just saying, well, maybe what it is let's do the right thing, and that doing good and doing well can actually go hand in hand.
They're not binary, right?
No,
it's like you can do both, for God's sakes.
This is not a zero-sum game, and frankly, it has been treated as zero-sum game, right? If I leave $1 on the table, then you get that dollar, so I'm going to take it off the table, right? And then we just ratchet that transaction decade after decade, and we see that gap sort of show up. So it can't be binary. It can't be zero-sum game. And the point of the secret sauce, we need a lot of people doing this, right? We need to prove that there is a market condition and viability for meeting people where they're at. I was speaking with somebody, and then we'll get actually into what we're doing. So sorry, right? I was speaking with somebody 2 weeks ago who I thought had a beautiful framing of affordable housing, because what they said was everybody, full stop, deserves affordable housing. Their point was, no matter what your income level is, you should be able to find housing at that price point, right? So it's sort of taking it away from the baggage that we usually put, this idea that housing is probably one of the only categories where we put this label on something as a negative, right? Like, we're using the word attainable because affordable housing has so much baggage. But why? Why though, right? Like, that is the big existential. Yeah. Why is it an offensive word to say you should be able to afford the home that you live in, right? Isn't that nuts? Isn't that nuts when we demonize the idea that you should be able to afford something, instead of sort of celebrating that market economics should work in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it might stem from the abuses that people have seen
Yeah,
over the years, and where it's just
a
like,
billion
yeah,
percent.
yeah, I think this is, this is always the struggle where, and it's the overcorrect, right? The binaries
That's
that
right.
we find ourselves in a lot, where all the way down to like, you can do well and, do right by the communities that you live in, and you can make a dollar and not screw people for it.
Right.
And it's like there's this thing of like, well, it's me or you, and that doesn't have to, that mentality is, it's so strange. It's one of the reasons I love filmmaking. It's like you're creating something from nothing and you're sharing it with people, and if you make money off of that, it's not on the backs of somebody. You're sharing a part of yourself,
Right.
which is one of the things that I love. It's kind of similar to what you're doing. You're creating this thing that you're ultimately giving access to, but it's not just access; it's ownership.
That's
And
right.
it doesn't have to be in those binary values where people just, they feel like they have to, it's either me or them. And if we don't get ourselves out of this circle of this mentality, what the world that we're going to live in is going to be pretty nasty, because wealth is getting aggregated to one.
Right.
I think you talked about this before. You made a joke. It's like we went, was it, going French, and what was the comment you made?
Yeah. Like the French
Yeah.
Revolution happened when 14% of the wealth, or the 14% of the wealth was held by a small group of individuals, and we sit in a country where we're at 17% right
Yeah,
now.
that's
So,
there.
right.
Yeah.
And so that's it. And for us, and what inherent is all about, and I like the word inherent. We like the word inherent. Obviously, we call ourselves it. But to dip into the legal definition, inherent is sort of the right or privilege to partner and invest in somebody else. Right? That's
Mhm.
pretty powerful. To say human to human that it is my privilege to do what I have with the tools I have and the skills and abilities that I have to undergird what you are trying to do, whether you are trying to sort of raise your family or take that next step up or sort of move through an economic bracket. That's really important. It's really important from an inherent perspective. What we do is we build home ownership. And so if we're focused on home ownership and the value that comes from home ownership and the wealth creation that can come from home ownership, then we start to ask lots more questions than just, did I build the cheapest house possible so I could meet a price point, right? Because my priority is first cost. That's what we usually see. Again, any of these sort of early efforts in affordable housing are really, how do I radically diminish first cost? And that's usually at the expense of quality,
Mhm.
longevity, right? So if I want to create generational home ownership and generational wealth creation through home ownership, well, that home should probably last more than 10 years, right? It should actually last
Yeah.
generationally. Crazy, which means we actually have to build it better. And
Mhm.
oddly enough, if we build things better, um, then my utility bills go down, right? Like, so if I'm more energy efficient, then I'm not spending money on something that I don't have. So again, total cost of ownership is a priority. And when we talk about that, okay, now we're looking at something that's rather interesting. You touched on something, this idea of the Model T and the Henry Ford model. One of the my favorite parts of that analogy and that comparison is what Henry Ford also said is his line workers should be able to buy the thing they made, right? If
Yeah.
I am,
Novel.
yeah, it's crazy, right? And
Yeah.
it's a hella good business, friends, right? Like if I can pay people enough to buy the thing they made, then I'm making more consumers out of my product, which allows me to build more of my product and do right by my folks, right? And so when we're drilling in and we're focused on it, right, like what are all the ways that we believe that generational wealth can be had through home ownership? Well, it starts right behind me in a
Mhm.
facility, right? Right now we have 20 people who are working in this facility who are making thriving wages, right? Better than minimum wage, better than living wage, benefits, vacation days, paid time off, healthcare, like all of those things that we tend to strip away, right?
Mhm.
In the effort to reduce the cost of something, um, without saying that we're stripping away quality and value at the same time. So, the other beautiful thing is our workforce is from the communities that we're serving. So, if I want to invest and
That's
build
great.
more housing in a community, why why would I not want to also build careers in that community, invest in the businesses in that community, so that there becomes a virtuous economy, right?
Hmm.
So we haven't even gotten to the house part yet, but the logic around it's the bigger pieces, right? If you create localized economies with local spending, I sit right now in a community that sees $124 million a year of dollar flight. That means money that's generated through businesses in this community,
Mm-hmm.
but don't stay in this community because the workforce is not from this community, right? And you see these as sort of these complicated constructs being both a global minded and a worldview, but also if we don't have hyperlocal economies, thriving communities thrive because of hyperlocal economies, right? And participating both at the micro and the macro at the same time. So when we start to have these conversations, when we can get past this idea that if you never had a fighting chance because of systemic structures, because of limitations around poverty, because of the zip code that you were born and raised, there is no amount of bootstrapping that can get you past the hurdles that we've put in the way, right?
Yeah.
There's no amount of Dave Ramsey 80-10-10 your way out of not affording a gallon of milk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we actually have to sort of unpack that. So we build in a facility, because if we want to build something that lasts a long time, I sure as heck I'm not going to build it out in 5 inches of snow that we got last night, right? That's not building a valuable product. If I'm building a
Yeah.
workforce, yeah.
I wanted to talk about this because we came down to do the interview initially, I was like pretty blown away that I'm not an engineer. I'm a moron. Like I say this all the time. Like I am not specialized in anything. Like I just have interest and I go down rabbit holes in them.
Yeah.
This should have been the name of the show, is Rabbit Hole. But I was really amazed that you can build a house indoors. I mean, just like never in a million years would have occurred to me that that's something that you could do. And it's, how many times have you driven past and you've seen like a house outside just like blowing in the wind, and
Right.
the Tyvek,
Just fluttering
fluttering. Yeah, there's just plastic wrap in the yard, in the neighbor's yard. It's like, yeah, that's probably not it's like you wonder why there's mold in the house. It's like, well, it rained 17 times in the home before they got the roof on it. Like that might have something to do with it.
Well, and to sort of quick jump to the end and come right back. This morning, we did something called a blower door test on one of our first houses. So what this does is it just looks how leaky is the house, right? Which is direct correlation to energy efficiency, to utility cost, to health and well-being within that house. We beat Chicago Energy Code by 2.5 times, right?
Oh, dude, that's incredible.
2.5 times what the threshold is, because usually these are sort of low barrier to entry situations. Now, why that's incredible is for a family, that's a healthier indoor quality. From a utility bill that goes down. The craziest thing, or the most exciting thing for me, is that house that beat Chicago Energy Code by 2.5x was built by a group of people who had never built housing before, who had never just had a certificate in workforce development, right? But not actually built it. So they built it here for the first time ever, and we crushed it, right?
That's amazing.
That's powerful, because thank you, right? What that also says is this idea makes sense. It's working. And the next house is going to be better. And the next house that's the other magic of doing something in a space like this. The iterative improvement that you get, because from the bottom to the top, everyone can call out and say, what if we did it this way? Would this make it better, right? Around being better, not cheaper, right? That's so, so important. And so it starts with the people and our people and how we sort of coexist. It goes to how we build this product. Like you said, building it in a facility means that we have exacting standards, right? And we have exacting standards with the crew that is learning how to do this. So we're breaking old processes and introducing better ones. We're not trying to use laser beams and sunshine. This is not sort of robots and automation. This is sort of women and men swinging hammers, building trade careers that may last with us for a long time, or may matriculate out and start their own business. God bless you. Like if you want to join the Carpenters Union, if you want to start your own renovation business, this is what we're in the business to do. Because if we're building wealth creation through homeownership and wealth creation through career development, those are the things that take that outflow dollars that I mentioned to you and staple them, hard code them, bake them into the block, as it were. That's the next big piece for us.
That's amazing. And I know that was another thing that you had brought up. We talk a lot about the makeup of the workforce, specifically in construction. It's pretty standard. And you guys have had a a lot of female interest in the workforce, which is pretty unusual. If you've ever walked by a construction site, you don't usually see a lot of women in the workforce. So you guys have actually had a pretty significant amount of outreach as well, and there's some development there. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really simple thesis, right? That shouldn't we operate a business that reflects the demographics of our city and our community, right? Like that's kind of an easy math equation, all right? So if we are 50% men, 50% women, why isn't our workforce 50% men, 50%, which it is, right? Instead of construction that's anywhere from 2 to 6% when you actually sort of unpack it. We partner with Chicago Women in the Trades, Revolution Workshop, Hair Clean Site. So we have previously justice involved individuals, women and men from the west and south sides of Chicago that are excited about career opportunities and frankly have been left out of that normative demographic and mix of construction, right? We've seen really exciting things. Like, so where we work, whenever we do these developments, we try to find those anchor institutions, right? What are the community assets that we can come around and amplify? An elementary school, in this case. And we had the 7th and 8th grade women at that school saying, we didn't know we could do that. Is that an option? Can I have that career? Can I go meet those women? Can I be a part of that? The police officers stopped by, the beat officers, and said, what do you all need? Because replacing vacant dirt with housing and eyes on the street is the most beneficial community policing structure. And also you have women and men working side by side in a healthy, oh God, like what else can we do? The principal of the school, when we said, look, we use a crane to put these houses in place. They come on big trucks. We're going to have to block off the street in front of the school. So we're not going to do it on a school day. We're going to do it on the weekend. That way we don't disrupt. And without missing a beat, she said, no, please. Because don't you understand? We're using what you guys are doing as curriculum, as opportunities for careers that people didn't know they
interesting.
had. As economic investment into one's own community, that actually if you have ownership in your community, then you see it thrive, right? So she's like, please block all day long as we can keep using it as a teaching tool for what it looks like for that next generation, right? Yeah. And that's our priority. We've had credit readiness programs with the parents and guardians of those students. We've brought other resources to bear. We don't, and maybe this is a tricky way to frame it, we're not bringing those resources because I want some 7th graders, mom or dad or aunt or grandma to get the benefit, but because I want that 7th grader to realize that there's a path that can leapfrog grandma, right? And so bring the resources to guardians so that the next generation, the one that are going to be around after we're gone, actually have that path, right? And actually see, oh, maybe there is a different outcome for myself or my family or my block or my neighborhood or my community.
Yeah, and I think what's so amazing about this is that, not to bang on the government again, because it's like I was in the Marines. I know how inefficient the government can be. Take that and then times it by like 5, and that's the military. It's like it's really remarkable that this is a problem that it's just like it's not going to get solved via like the typical. I think the typical talking point is like elect an official. We'll figure it out. Right. And it's like, how long has that been going on? It's not getting figured out. It's not getting solved. It's you, and it's a small handful of individuals and investors that have gotten together to realize that this is something that can be solved, and you guys are doing it. Right. You guys are doing it.
Right.
Like this is incredible. And again, it's like, it's the difference between, especially right now in politics, where I think a lot of both sides of the aisle, people are very quick to hand off something that they should be doing themselves. And part of this, I want people to get more involved in their community as well and be aware of things like this, because we have the ability to solve these things if and only if we take the time to get involved and to be informed. That's right. And that's something that, it might not be as fun as, being on your cell phone and looking at bullshit on TikTok or whatever, because that is a lot of fun. But it's not getting us much further when it comes to like the value added activity in our life and the things that we can be doing to change the world for the better. And part of that is to not be constantly in the rabbit hole of amusement and taking time to be more informed about what's happening in the community. Things are changing, and there are positive things happening. You wouldn't know it if you watch the news.
That's right.
Or sometimes if you talk to me, because I go down these rabbit holes. But there are some really wonderful things happening in the community, and you guys are one of those. And I just want to, again, I wanted to highlight that. It's like there was an opportunity for a change where a big business looks at it and they go, nope, we it's cost first. Where can we cut? Where can we cut? Where can we cut? Then you get into this thing within business, and we're seeing it right now where there's been over 100,000 layoffs in the tech world. Just over recently, and it's probably going to get worse still. We're not even in Q2 yet. Q1 numbers, inflation's still going. The GDP is still janky, excuse me. So it's like we're probably going to have another issue with this, and companies do this thing where they go, well, how much can we cut? We need to be leaner. We need to be leaner.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between being lean and anemic. And
that's right.
And creating a point where it's like, you've actually offloaded 5 jobs now to a single person because you're trying to be quote unquote lean.
Right.
And it's like that's not intelligent business.
No, and it's wildly inefficient. Yeah, no.
Wildly inefficient. And you also don't want the bloat of like a Lehman Brothers where you're so big that you're just like you're a lumbering giant and you can't operate efficiently. Right. And I think it's just like, again, like there's an intelligent way to do things. If you just spend the time and you're thoughtful enough to try to figure out how to do it, you can do it. And you guys are kind of the embodiment of that.
Well, just to even double tap on that, right? Like we have lost, and I think we're refining it, or forcibly, at least I believe so for the work we're doing, that sort of good business isn't always what is the leanest way to pinch this, right? Because we saw this through supply chain disruptions, where a decade ago or 2 decades ago, those would have been disruptions, but not sort of macro scale disruptions, because I would have left enough raw goods on my shelf for the next 3 months worth of business, because that's running a good business. So that if there's an issue with my supply chain, I can soak it up while we correct or find alternative paths, right? To getting so lean because we are sort of gross margin focused so hard that 3 months worth of materials on my shelf, why am I wasting money on shelves, right? Like, let's get it. Let's operate in just in time. And I'm not sort of poo-pooing these things. In fact, and to your point, it's a sort of elephant and rider mythos, or let's go back to your military experience, right? It's the fighter jet and the aircraft carrier. Governments can be the lumbering giants. They're slow to move. They're slow to action. The rider is the one that's a little bit more nimble and can kind of see better paths, and sort of, you're never going to get an elephant to make a 90-degree turn, but you can make a series of 1-degree turns to get them there. You're never going to sort of pivot with an aircraft carrier and sort of go check out that thing, but you're going to send some jets out to sort of do things in a much more agile way. I think there is actually a really healthy structure. At least we find it, right? We are both blessed and challenged by partnering with city, state, and federal partners and federal officials on this work, knowing that we're always going to be much more agile and much faster than our government counterparts are. But what we've also seen in that, just like that fighter jet that can take off, sort of scan the horizon, come back, report back, do that back and forth, is we're seeing those incremental shifts, right? We're seeing actual policy change because we're in a position to say, look, this is what community incomes are. These are the needs of that community. These are the resources that community has. This is what housing costs. This is how we finance housing. This is how we keep people in housing. This is how we support them in the long term. These are the realities, the gaps, the deltas, the challenges, the inefficiencies, and opportunities. And we can be super transparent about that so that we can say, all right, so yes, city of Chicago, you're never going to be able to solve that equation in any meaningful lifetime's worth of change. But now that you have it on the whiteboard, sort of pilot out, you can say, well, here's a thing. Here's an area. It doesn't fix everything, but we have it within our ability right now to change that thing. And we squeak it out. We get a little more efficient. We point it in a little bit of a better direction. In the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s America, the sort of great American dream and the idea of owning a home and the value and the dollars that the government put into highways and infrastructure and schooling and GI bills that financed lots of things and got education, all those sorts of things. Those were enablers to the private market being and doing what it did. And so it's both sort of in my purview, and my head's thick enough and stupid enough, right? That I keep on slamming into the wall of that, because if the more that we unlock those enablers, we're not asking for much, right? What we say is,
Mhm.
well, we unlock the civic potential of nascent land, right? So you want more housing in a community. Get out of my way so we can put that housing in that community. You're going to realize
Mhm.
increased tax base, increased safety and security, new dollars that go to that elementary school and new students
Es-
in that school.
Yep, especially in a place like Chicago where people are leaving because of crime and corruption and the streets and the infrastructure.
Right?
People are not staying here, and this
No.
is a thing that nobody's talking about. Is that part like headquartering business in Chicago, giving companies
Yeah.
tax incentives for a decade to bring their companies and headquarter them here? You get a tax base, you get an increase of
Yeah.
people, and therefore you don't have to continually raise the taxes on the people that are here. You keep squeezing the people here, people keep leaving.
They
This
squeeze
is
out. Yeah.
they exactly. It's a like squeeze a tube of toothpaste. What's going to happen on the top of it? They're gone.
That's right.
That's it. It's very simple economics, and I think, and again, like I'm very quick to speak maybe negatively to the government because of especially over the last like 5 years and
Oh,
what's been happening in
yeah.
politics, and it's very easy to be negative on that. I think you've highlighted, though, a really kind of a wonderful yin and yang conversation, which is this stuff. We live in binaries, right? So
Right.
it's like we go all government, then we go, it doesn't work. We'll go all anarchy. And it's like, that didn't work either. We got to go back to all government. It's like there's a happy medium in between where we can have, and we need each other in this, where there's like things that have to happen. You have to have regulation because of runaway. Look, there is such a thing as vulture capitalists. If you don't believe me, look at the news media.
Right.
I mean, they'll do and say anything to get a click. They don't give a
Yeah.
shit. They'll lie.
Yep.
They'll post stuff, sensationalism. If it leads, it bleeds. Like that is the worst of vulture capitalism.
That's right.
Say and do anything for a click and for a profit. So it's like if there isn't, and look how poorly the media is regulated.
Right.
So if there isn't some type of regulation, especially in housing, where people will take horrible shortcuts and do all kinds of stuff. Look at what happened in Turkey.
Right.
That was horrible. The earthquake, but looks like there was a lot of building contractors that cut corners, and there was an earthquake, and then you have an entire high rise falling that shouldn't
Right.
have fallen
Across the
so
street
there.
from a building that didn't fall because it actually was built per
Exactly.
that code. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a story here where, like, as much as I like to lean very much on private enterprise and the ingenuity of people, because to your point, it's like you can do things much faster and you can innovate much quicker. But the government in Chicago has gotten involved with this because they realize they cannot solve this problem.
That's right.
And they've been very supportive of you in this, which is another thing I'd love to discuss more on.
Yeah, yeah, and to kind of frame the point that you just made, the analogy that I use all the time is the first time my little kids sat behind the steering wheel, they think you drive by like cranking the wheel all the way to the left and to the right all day long, right? And you know as
Yeah,
well as
of
I do
course.
when you're driving,
You don't drive like that?
no, right. Like it's the subtle corrections in the road. We live in a world of binaries where like that didn't work, so therefore it must be that, and nothing of that is going to be helped. And then we ping pong back and forth, and that's a real big challenge. Why I have this sort of perspective around sort of leading the horse to water, slowly turning the ship, or whatever bad analogy we want to do, is that we've seen that go the other way, right? We've seen that in the world of vulture capitalism, of saying like I'm going to slowly steer the 800-pound gorilla of the U.S. government away from the things that actually aren't beneficial in meaningful ways, because it's beneficial. I'm deregulated so that I can put more dollars in my wallet and I can say whatever I want because it's
Mm-hmm.
clicks and hits, right? What's been really neat with the city, and it's been a work in progress. So this is not sort of like, oh, you got a great idea, let's go. Like it's taken a lot of work and machination, but the city understanding that, and you had touched on this earlier. Chicago is the second fastest attriting state in the country. We're losing
Yeah, I
population
know.
faster than 48 other states in the United States. And
Yep.
Fulton Market, the West Loop of Chicago, is the fastest growing neighborhood in the country. So we continue to live in these dualities. Well, so that means it's not folks
Wow.
leaving Fulton Market. It's actually people flocking to the West Loop but all of a sudden we have people who are just hardworking, working class Americans who are saying like, I've got an assistant manager job at a store and I can barely keep a roof over my head. I can be an
Mm-hmm.
assistant manager at any store in any other place and maybe have a fighting chance to keep a roof in my head, right? And so that's where we're seeing that exodus. We're also seeing, right, is many of the places that were those exodus destinations, right? Nashville is an interesting sort of hot button, sexy city. New construction houses now start over $400,000 in a place like Nashville, right? Labor in Nashville is traveling, construction labor is traveling 2, 3, 4 hours each way to get to their construction. So we are, when we see these exodus and these pressures, we're just sort of re-putting the pieces in different locations, right? As a country, we have over 16 million households who make, what do they say? Like, happiness is making 70,000 bucks or more. Well, prior to inflation, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
16 million households in our country who make between $75,000 and $125,000 a year, and who spend more than half of that on rental housing, right? So when we look at these big macro that's crazy. That's bullshit. That is the crisis and the challenge, right? Is that we have to unpack and break that. With the city, we've been blessed to sort of see this movement because we put our money where our mouth is, right? We are a for-profit company. One day, I plan to sort of actually sort of say that and mean it, because the balance sheet looks there. But we have to get there. But we're going to talk the talk and walk the walk. We're going to build housing in a way that is moving much faster than we can do in a pure sort of government-sponsored model. But we can be government adjacent all day long, and that's what we're doing here with everyone from our city hall to our local aldermen. All right, so what can we do? What can I do to pilot a better way to do this for you, right? So if you can sort of take a deep breath on some of the construct that you have and just let us focus on showing what that looks like, well, then we may help you tweak your regulation a little bit, because we just help validate and prove that there was a different way to do it. And then maybe a little bit more and a little bit more. And that opens the door up a little bit more and more for more people to participate. We sit in a city, and there are many cities like this, right? But here in Chicago, we have over 2,000 vacant acres of developable residential land. 2,000 acres, okay?
In the Chicago downtown area?
Within city limits of Chicago. Okay.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot. You're touching property taxes and taxation and some of the challenges there. If people lived just looking at the sort of base tax rate on our west and south sides, right? If we just use that number, that's $500 million a year of property taxes, right? So like soak that up a little bit, right? Under-enrolled elementary schools are obviously under-enrolled elementary schools because if there's 70% vacant dirt across the street from them, who's going to that? So we start to look at these have been sort of subtle and soft, sometimes systemic, micro disinvestments that lead to macro schisms. And this is where we're guiding with the city, with Cook County, in conversations with other cities. Like, okay, you have this thing, you have land, right? So you have land, but you need housing, and you need to create more jobs. And the general attitude is like, land. We have land, but we need housing and we need jobs. I can't. Can anybody think of something that could? Anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so we've seen these shifts, never as fast as I'd want, but also,
of course,
faster than I ever thought was possible. Right? We're still measuring in sort of months and years these sort of tactile changes, but I never would have imagined 1 year ago or 5 years ago being able to say I've seen actually significant shift and change, and something that took me 28 months that now takes 9 months for folks. Like 9 months is still pretty crazy for a land transaction, but it's not 27 months, right? That's a significant decrease by working through this stuff.
Yeah, and it's like the old expression, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's really true. I mean, the more people you put in these communities, the more it's going to help the community. I was in New York City over, end of December, beginning of December. And I used to go to New York all the time. I haven't been since COVID. Really sad what happened. And I think people know, but I hadn't seen it myself. Yeah. And I went, and it's like, all the shops that are boarded up in the first floor. I mean, it's just like it is a different city. Yeah. And a lot of that was, yes, because of COVID. And there is probably some mismanagement there as well, which I don't want this to be about that. But I think it's one of those things where you look at how unaffordable New York City is. And there's this concept that people have, and you talked about it earlier where you're like, well, I can be an assistant manager anywhere. Why am I doing this here and struggling? And there's this thing about like, well, I'm from New York, like the New Yorker pride. From anybody from like Long Island or Brooklyn or whatever, like they are in it to win it. Like they love New York. But there's also like people that I've known that have lived in New York their entire life that have left. And they're like, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I should have done it forever ago because I'm living a way better life. And there's this, like, New York is a very social town. So especially for people who live there, it's like you have a place. You don't really live there. You just kind of go shower there and then you leave. And then you go back. You go to work. You go out. You go to dinners. You go to bars and nightclubs and whatever. You crash, sleep and do it all over again. But it's really remarkable to see what long term this will do. If we don't get ahead of this. In New York, there's another problem in New York that they're suffering that I hope never happens here. But a lot of the real estate is used, and they'll have an entire mid-rise that's all purchased, $5-6 million homes
and vacant,
all furnished, all vacant. No one lives in it because there's a lot of money laundering, unfortunately, that happens in New York real estate, and the city has not gotten ahead of that. That has forced commercial real estate property to be extremely expensive. I mean, there's like last time I was there, I remember I went to I can't remember the taco place now. It's actually really good, but I was like, how many tacos do you have to sell in a month to be able to afford this place? Because it was in the meatpacking district, and I'm like, this shit is not cheap to rent. No, it's not. And it's like, and again, it's like at some point, like for those national brands, those bits of real estate, they just become loss leaders. You're like, I can't make money here. I'm not even going to bother, but I want the brand awareness in New York. So we have the New York property and we'll make the money up somewhere else. That's a crazy business model for a city that should be trying to increase small business ownership, should be wanting to get restaurants back.
Bring them back in.
And it's like we're going to have the same problem here if we don't get ahead of the cost of housing, the taxes that are coming. The Illinois or Cook County legislation says that taxes can be increased up to 5% based on inflation. Well, inflation's over 15 now. It's 20 in some places. I think it's maybe 12 or 11 here in Chicago. So it's like the city can raise property tax 5%. That's a massive increase. If you have a $700,000 condo, 5% is nothing to sneeze at when you're already paying 9%.
That's right.
So we're heading into a weird place where if we don't maneuver properly, we could cause the fallout could cause a lot of breakage very quick. And that's one of the things that I'm also trying to get people to be aware of is like, not just what's happening in your community and organizations like yourself, but it's like, we really have to just chill out on the taxation, just throw money at the problem issue because it's not getting solved. But we can solve it with small business, and we can solve it by empowering small business, and we can solve it by empowering small business owners like yourself to be able to fix these problems that the city is having. So I would love to see is the city identify what is the issues that we're having and maybe look to lean on small business, independent business to be able to solve those problems in a much faster way rather than turning back to your point about the aircraft carrier, that lumbering machine or that elephant that's not going to turn quickly. And we have a problem that needs a pretty quick response. So I sincerely hope the government can figure out a way to work with private enterprise to create a fast response, not a lumbering one.
No, you're exactly right, Reed. This is we have to look at a more agile response. You touch on something, this notion of rising tide lifts all boats. It's both sort of delightfully cliche and couldn't be more true.
Couldn't be more true.
We sit in so where one of our first developments is within 2 to 8 blocks of $250 million of new spending, right? With affordable rental apartments, new institutions, new street, like some pretty significant value add to a neighborhood. And 1 block away, 67% of the lots are dirt, right? So there is this duality where my dollar can go much farther by stabilizing and being in somebody's pocket. So if a family can afford the home that they're living in, right, without being housing cost burden, able to save, to sort of plan, to sort of to have a bigger tolerance window because I'm not stressed out about this stuff, I don't need to prop up a restaurant because I'm going to go there for Sunday for dinner. Like that restaurant doesn't need to be propped if there's an economy and individuals who can afford to go to that restaurant, right? Like these are very obvious structures. Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago, this was about 5 years ago, released their report on the inequity and the isolation and separation in the city of Chicago. And what they came to is segregation and inequity in our city, the sort of tale of two cities, leads to $2 billion of missed annual GDP. Right. So
Jesus,
what they're
that's
straight
such
up,
a big amount of money.
it is right. So what they're straight up saying is, look, if more of us had opportunity for more things, we'd all be massively better off. Right.
Massively better off.
Massive. So your point on New York City, right? Like when we use real estate as sort of tax shelters or cash shelters, as it were, then it doesn't matter what they cost because I'm not living there. I need to put this bucket of money somewhere that can go somewhere meaningfully. We see a massive push, and there's a narrative in our country around, the solution is rental single family housing, right? And the logic behind it is, well, that's what people want now. People don't want the commitment of ownership. They want rental. So that's why we're doing it. Fact of the matter is, if there's no way in hell I can afford to own a home, then I'm choosing rental, not because I think it's a great idea, but because it's the only path I have, right?
Right. Yeah.
And if it's the only path I have, then as humans, how do we like make ourselves feel better at night? Pretending like we made that as an active decision. Like, oh no, owning a home's not for me because I'm a person of the world and I want to travel in the freedom. And that's the story I tell myself because I could never possibly own a home.
Yeah.
Or the delightful memes that are like, I can't wait for the housing market to crash so maybe I get a chance to buy a home, right? Like these constructs are really challenging, and they don't have to be so, right? They really don't. When we look at almost half the cost of building anything, but let's talk about housing, has nothing to do with the housing, but all the sort of disintermediate or the intermediation, pardon me, and separation, isolation, zero sum game. Well, gosh, that's why we've taken this attitude. All right, so if we acquire land, if we develop land, we build a workforce, we commit to that workforce to invest in a neighborhood at a scale, not just one at a time, but at a volume scale that sees significant economic opportunity. We can strip away a lot of the costs without actually stripping away any of the quality. We, in fact, go the other way and add more quality.
Yeah, what you talked about earlier with the blow test or whatever.
That's right.
That was called.
That's exactly. Yeah, that's a blower door test. Let's make certain that we don't confuse anyone.
Let me get very specific about that. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Which we'll talk about later. But so when you think about that, right, what we also have done is, all right, it's not just about congratulations, here's the keys. Good luck figuring out how to be a homeowner, but staying with a homeowner in the long term. So what we looked at is, all right, what are some of those big social determinants? What are some of the biggest challenges for being a first-time home buyer? And especially in LMI or low and moderate income communities, right? Working class, like the backbone of our country, class communities. That's just what it is, no matter where we are in this country. It's if I, as a wage earner, die, my family is grieving my death and also foreclosing on their house, filing for bankruptcy, and moving in with grandma, right? Like, if I get hurt on the job, I'm going to sell out my future self to get back to that job so I can make my payment on time, right? So we said, all right, those are two of the leading indicators of foreclosure in our communities. So let's provide life and disability insurance, right? Like, why wouldn't we backstop a family? Okay, safety and security in a community, right? Especially when you're repopulating and stabilizing what was vacant land. That's a question that comes up. You talked about it. Chicago has taxes, it has crime, it has some of these other things. Well, mind you, those are more narratives out loud. Even though they're very real challenges we have to work with, we amplify them to prove one agenda or another. What we said was, all right, we're going to partner with a security monitoring company for the first 5 years. So the family doesn't have to think about that, right? We're going to monitor air quality, water quality, and energy usage, right? So that your home can say, hey, Reed, man, I think you have a water leak. Do you want somebody to take care of that now before it becomes a massive water damage? And I'm sorry, this is a little too soon knowing that you've had some water issues in your house. But, right, the ability for your house to be like, you probably don't want to spend 50 grand on water, so let's replace that $5 part that broke, right? Whatever that might be. And that's where we get to, if I want to create long-term home ownership and generational wealth creation, we have to get all the things that are in the way of those sort of that fighting chance, that start to get to a place of thriving. Now, if a homeowner can get a first-time homeowner can last those first 5 years, then what we generally see as a massive preponderance for generational wealth, generational shift, and single generation change in economic outlook and opportunity for a household, right? What
Mm.
it also does is that neighborhood, if I live there for 5 years, I'm probably going to stick around longer, right? Which means that now that school is stabilized. Now my family is fully invested in that school. My children are sort of matriculating through it. We're starting to see that sort of shift and that turn. That small business, that restaurant that I mentioned, when you have more people in a community who aren't severely housing cost burdened, well, then now I'm going to take my partner out to dinner Saturday night because I can, because that's
Hmm.
an option that I have right now. And so we think about, so what does that look like from the homes that we're building? But I'd be remiss to say it's not just about generational wealth through building homes, and that's why we're not a home builder. We're a home ownership builder. It's
Mm.
because when we do that, the residents, everyone else who owns in that community, they see that rising tide too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, like I said, what you guys are doing is incredibly important. I can't stress it enough, man. Like we have to figure out a way to get out, to not continue to erode this middle class, the low income families, the low middle income families, the middle income families. They're getting destroyed in inflation. They're getting destroyed in taxation. They're not being represented. They don't feel represented. I hear this all the time. We're seeing this, and again, it's like the problems that I think can be solved if the government just gets a little bit more intelligent about not trying to solve them themselves and looking to. And again, it's like, if do we actually want to solve them or not? Like
that's right.
that's my
Full stop. Full
yeah.
stop.
It's like that's because I get to this. I go to this place in my head all the time where I'm like, the same shit's been talked about for 40, 50, 60 years, and it's getting worse
Mhm.
in a lot of regards. So it's like, do we want to solve it? Then fucking let's do it. And let's not try to get the government to do it where the government doesn't do things well. And the government can create partnerships and
Yes,
grant a lot of speed and efficiency where it wants to. But where it doesn't want to, my God, it is it a hurdle.
it is.
It's a massive hurdle. And I just think that we could be doing this thing a lot better. And I love the model that you put together, because the model you put together ultimately is an exemplification of how you can do it with
That's
the
right.
government and not go overcorrect and not get crazy, and actually provide jobs and security and stability, not just for the people working there, but for the neighborhoods that you're going to
Right.
ultimately create, and for all the land that is just sitting there vacant.
Fallow. Yeah.
I mean, what a miss of tax dollars, where it's like, if you want to get, if you're concerned about, where the money's going, or not having enough money coming into the government, so you're going to raise property taxes, increase the population base so you have more tax revenue.
Right.
Stop squeezing the people and bring and incentivize more people to come here. And I think if we go the route that you're laying out, Chicago is going to have a boom like it hasn't had in 20 years.
Well,
And it's heartbreaking that this is happening, because I fucking love this city, and it's
right.
gotten really difficult to live in.
That's it. That's it. And I think that there can be a boom that is actually sort of wildly collectively beneficial too. Um, one of these sort of unspoken things, so maybe we'll just speak it here, right? We have actually gotten really good. We did that thing about 60, 70 years ago where we supported the investment in ownership, right? And then we got away from that, right? Because we got into this language and this dialogue that um, if I help you get into home ownership, I'm giving you a handout, right?
Mm.
And the logic of that. So we talk about housing as infrastructure, right? Because healthy infrastructure breeds healthy economies, and if you don't have healthy housing infrastructure, then you struggle there. So what we've done over the past, half a century, is actually focused on, and rightfully so to a certain extent, and generally successful to a certain extent, um, government financing and funding of affordable rental housing. Okay,
Mm.
uh, it's not perfect, nothing is, but we've gotten pretty good at it. So much
Mm.
so that we have stopped focusing on the world of ownership, and we've totally focused on the world of rental. Now, where the communities that we're working in right now, for example, that's why I was just doing the math. to build 70 apartments, affordable rental apartments. The money to build those 70 apartments is equivalent to me building 250 owner-occupied single-family homes. 70 apartments, 250 owners, right? 70 renters, 250 owners, right? So that that's simple math, right? Simple conversation. Now
Simple math.
Now let's keep on pulling on that thread. Part of the challenge, and again, we've done a very good job of building safety nets, but what we've done, and this so often happens, both on the public side and on the private side, is we build the safety net that also put the ceiling in place, right? So we got the net to keep it from falling all the way to the bottom, but we also put a lid on the container too. So you're not going to you're like a little firefly. You're gonna fly around, and you may have a little bit of glow, but you're gonna
poke some holes in the top for you so you can breathe.
That's right. And so what we also see specifically in low-income rental housing is the inability to move on, right? So if my income crosses the threshold, well, then I can no longer live there. But I can't yet live in a market solution. So where do I go? Well, after sort of trying that a couple times or seeing sort of family members try that or generational baggage around that, you're like, well, I'm just going to stop like 10 cents short of that requirement. I'm not, I have aspirations, but I'm not going to apply those aspirations because as soon as I make a dime more, as it were, those aspirations, they're gone because now all of a sudden I'm upside down on everything again. And so this is where we believe that all of these categories are important. Safety net housing is important. Safety net rental housing is important with a path and an agenda around sort of coming alongside folks. When we say that we believe in bringing subsidy to meet income levels where they're at, this is not handouts or write-downs. This is actual investment in the infrastructure. So if we can get more families into houses, then everybody's property values go up. The quality of the education goes up because we have more students in it. The small businesses on the commercial street thrive because there's people that can actually, like, there are multipliers to investing in this kind of way and doing this kind of thing. It is truly about sort of building back the economies that allowed communities to thrive. When we talk about city communities like we're working in West Temple Park, for example, these are not new ideas and new concepts. 50, 75 years ago, the neighborhoods that are 60 or 70% dirt, those were houses with families living in, working class houses. They are beautiful when you drive down Madison Avenue on the west side of Chicago, for example, or Chicago Avenue. Beautiful shuttered old department stores and apartment buildings, and which tells you that there was there. There was an economy there, right?
Isn't that crazy?
It is really crazy.
It's just gone. It's just gone. It's so stupid.
It's just gone. And we go back to that early, like, well, shoot, can't figure out where the economy went. We don't know why we're closing these schools. We've got all this land, and this is private side too, because look, if I were in the business of building 2 houses a year, then I'm going to sort of fill up the cost of that so I can thrive on those 2 houses, so I can raise my family, right? So, but if I can build in a neighborhood 100 houses or 1,000 houses a year, right? My economies as a business person work very, very differently, right? Because I can realize that by reducing the cost of housing, that barrier to entry for a home ownership, I'm reaching a much, much larger population. So step one, by kind of shrinking maybe margin, I actually get a volume play that's exponentially bigger than if I just tried to boat my margin on every single one. That's step one. Step two, in North America, we provide subsidy for housing up to 140% of the area median income. So in the city of Chicago, a 4-person family who makes $145,000 a year can still qualify for subsidized housing. Okay. That's the reality of what we've done with the housing cost, the way out of touch housing cost models that we've built. Okay, but if that household and 145,000, that's good paper, right? Like, you should be able to thrive and raise a family and sort of take a summer trip to the Dells if you wanted to, right? But what happens is now we're spreading what was meant for safety net. We're spreading it to bigger and bigger swaths of our economy because fewer and fewer people can participate. somebody making $150,000 a year who can't participate in single family home ownership, we got a crisis there. That's a challenge, right?
That's bananas, man. 150,000 and you can't afford a home. And
Right.
this gets in. And you made a comment earlier about this is the first time we feel like we might not be leaving this better off than we found it for the next generation. I've had conversations with people that are much younger than myself, getting up there in years, but
Old man.
it's like, there are people in their early 20s are like, I'm never going to be able to afford a house.
No.
I can't afford a condo in downtown.
No.
Are you kidding me? A two bath
Yeah,
condo.
I'm trying to buy eggs right now.
No shit. There's that too, but it's like outside of inflation, like you get a salary out of college, you're not gonna. And again, it's like I'm not trying to get into like the wealth handout or whatever. And it's like there's just if you look at what is happening from a housing cost, if you're in your early 20s and you're looking at getting an average, it's $600,000 to $800,000 for a 2-bed, 2-bath, and it's like, well, get a 1-bed. It's like, well, a lot of people work from home,
Right.
so now your office is in your living room,
Right.
and that's annoying. And
Right.
I've done that. I have done that. It sucks. Where like I had a studio where it's like my bed and my like everything was just
It was
right
all the same.
there.
Yeah.
and you could never. There's no separation from your work life. You just were always in it. It's kind of does something to you mentally that you can never really separate from it.
Yep.
So to have like the ability to get a 2-bed, 2-bath in a downtown area that's not 600-700, or if you go to Austin where inflation is through the roof,
Right.
a 2-bed, 2-bath that's 1,000 square foot, that's a tiny 2-bed, 2-bath,
Yeah.
can be upwards of $1 million.
That's right.
Like, how are you like what? And again, you don't have to live in
$1,000 a square foot, right? Like think about that.
Yeah, it's insane. And then if it's like, well, don't live in downtown, just live in the suburbs. Like, okay, I'll go get us a 1,500 square foot 3-bed, 2-bath. It's like, well, that's $800,000.
That's right.
So like, all right, well, I'll go live in fucking middle of nowhere and drive 4 hours into into downtown. Again, so it's just like a thing where like the younger generation, like the next generation after us, if this continues on this path, dude, life is going to suck.
Yeah.
It's going to be horrible. And and it's like the Klaus Schwab, like you'll own nothing and be happy. Like by 2030, it's like you're going to, it's like someone's going to own it.
Someone's
is it going to be you? Is it going to be you assholes who own everything currently? And I'm not going to have any ability to get out of poverty where I just constantly hand my money to you, not to go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
But it's like we have to, for all the reasons that you stated earlier, we have to give people the ability to get at to have a ladder out of their economic situation.
Yeah,
and
that's
if
right.
we don't provide that, the world we're going to live in is going to be horrible.
That's
It's
right.
going to be horrible. It's going to be owned by a handful of people, and everyone's going to have absolute shit.
And it's going to crack, and it's already cracking, right? It is.
Right.
That's exactly right. And that is a significant piece, right? That to your point, we'll just get a smaller place. We'll just get a 1-bedroom apartment in that same neighborhood, $600,000. I still can't afford that, right? We'll get a smaller place. A studio is $400,000. Like, what world do we live in? And these are
New
artificial.
York.
Yeah, these are artificial numbers. They're actually not tied to the economic value of the thing, other than we don't have enough housing stock, right? We look at across our country since the late aughts, right? 2007, 2008, 2009. We had a housing deficit going into that, and then we stopped, and then had never picked that up. And so it gets sort of exponentially worse. All the economic triggers that we talk about, it's interesting when you look at sort of the big macroeconomic challenges. They're just like, we're not doing anything special. There's no mystique to it, right? So if we keep replacing people's cash with credit, and so that's how we fix a consumer-driven economy. You don't have enough cash to do it, so we're going to do it a different way. We're going to try to push all that wealth creation to a smaller and smaller population, and we carry on this assumption that even putting a ladder in a hole is somehow giving a handout. Like that's messed. That's like
It's bananas.
If I have no meaningful way to improve my economic situation, then there's no amount of anything that you can tell me that I'm not doing or not doing that will actually change it, right? Like if I throw a rope down into that hole for you to climb out of, but don't tie it to the top because you got to figure that out yourself, and then I'm surprised that you didn't get out of the hole. Like, this is the stuff that we face, man. And there's this beautiful space, I think, in the middle, where we can have and by middle I mean just sort of like existentially middle, because nothing that we're talking about is a partisan conversation. Nothing that we're talking about
True.
is a legal conversation, a political conversation, a civic conversation, a demographic conversation. Like it has nothing to do with any of that. We've managed to say that I can't have a house because Reed has a house, or Reed can't have a house because Tim. Like we're sort of showing what we're against or what we're fighting, instead of just saying, oh gosh, actually, there's enough wealth and prosperity in our country for both of us to have houses or to be able to eat.
Yeah.
And there's economic value that comes out of that.
Yes, there is, and there should be, and we can't keep eroding it. Tim, how do people find information about your organization? Where do we go to get information on this? How do we find you? How do people contact you? How do people get involved? I think what you're doing is absolutely, like I said, it's amazing. We absolutely have to have stages and steps to get out of certain economic situations, and if we don't have that, to your point, if we're a consumer economy and people can't consume anything, how does that end? It ends poorly is the answer. I'll save you from looking it up, but it's like, how do people find you? How do people get involved?
Well, and here's the thing, and that's the exact right thing. So get involved in any way you can in these conversations. Get involved with us, please, because what's also interesting is that I've got a hand-shaped bruise right here at the top of my head, which is sort of like, oh, this is really good work, Tim. Oh, keep it up and let me know when you're done with it, right? So what's crazy when we're tackling sort of the trade career challenges that we have in our city and our country, and the housing challenges that we have in our city and our country, and I can't get a bank to lend on it because they're like, yeah, but really, does it make sense, right? So the stuff we're building is based on the bricks in my house, right? So leveraging these things, it's getting people to say, put your money where your mouth is. If you actually think there's a better version of Chicago, let's have a conversation, right? Because we can't do this alone. If you are a mayor or a civic leader, like, you don't have to do it. You're never going to be able to solve it within the construct of your role, whether you're an alderman, a mayor, a senator, a governor, et cetera. Like even the president of the United States, who just 2 days ago with Yellen said, hey, counties, states, cities, remember the $1.9 trillion we gave y'all? Use it to build housing and jobs so that we can stabilize our economy. Go use that, but that's the extent to what we can do. So let us work with you on that, right? Inherenthomes.com, INHERENTHOMES.com. That's where we start. But the conversation is so much bigger. For us, what we have found in this is it's not about who we know, and this is true in life. It's about who knows what we're doing. And so the more righteous, wiggly trouble that we can make about this narrative, the more that I can empower the housing committee at city council to say, wait, we should be providing better housing. We're going to make the noise on it, right? Allows us to keep our heads down and do the work that we're doing. This is what Inherent's all about, right? Is bringing as many people, bringing the best of us to the most of us. That's a simple thesis, a simple argument, but it requires everything from capital to partnerships to civic leaders who say, look, I can actually get reelected if I'm creating housing and jobs in my purview, right? It's business leaders who can now say, look, my employees can actually live near where they work, which has massive economic benefit for me as a business, as it were. Or my work from home population can actually comfortably work from home without becoming a schizophrenic mess about the reality that I'm space constrained, right?
Right.
And so it's across all these categories, because the knife's edge that we're on as a country and as even as a business is we can tip this way and never solve and get out. And the scary stories that we tell in the dark about what the future version of is if we aren't more equitable and more opportunity driven for more people. Or we can flip the other way and build more housing, build more economy, build more scale, and see a renaissance, as it were, right? What did people say, besides the whole pandemic thing, the roaring 20s? Like, we're ready as a country to roar back to life, to have something worth fighting for, to give a damn about our fellow Americans so that we can fly that flag with pride, right? And we need something to come around. My hunch is that the more of us that aren't terrified by our living conditions and terrified by sort of the lack thereof, or those 20-somethings who are like, yeah, there is actually no plausible future for me right now. We get past that, oh, it's a much better place for literally everybody, whether you own your home right now or not, whether you are on that economic ladder or just trying to find stable ground. That's it for us.
That and dude, it's a message of hope, and it's something that I think everybody can get behind, especially in a world that for the last couple of years has felt just out of control and hopeless. It's a wonderful thing, and I would love to see, especially the younger generations that spend a lot of time on social media. Not to sound lecturing, and I'm sorry if I come off as lecturing, but it's like rather than spending time on social media complaining about what somebody said, spend time getting the word like this out, which is actually going to impact your life. Getting somebody thrown off of social media is going to do nothing comparatively to force it. Use your power in numbers. Use the power that you have to get civic leaders to look at things like this in order to build things like attainable housing, so that way your future is impacted in a positive way. These are things that we can all, and again,
material
it's a
change
nonpartisan
we can
issue.
do. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So the very simplistic things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs can be met, and you're not going to have to worry about whether or not you're going to be able to afford your future, or how you're going to own a home, or whether or not if you can have kids, because everything's so damn unaffordable. These are simple things that we can do to solve it.
That's right.
And it's just a matter of getting involved, starting a conversation, having a conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. But use the power of social media that you have to amplify messages like this to make a change, actual real change, not some platitude, not some talking point, not some shit that's just nice to hear in a political speech. Something that is actually going to change the very fabric of the world that we live in, and the people that will actually be able to afford to live in it. This is fixable. This is fixable. If and only if we take the time to fix it.
That's right.
And I think we can. And I know I'm trying to do my part. I hope everybody listening and watching will try to do theirs as well. Tim, you are an absolute national treasure. I love you to death. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing. I can't thank you enough for making time for this. And I'll do everything in my power to get the word out, and hopefully we can get more people involved, whether it's a civic leader or individuals that want to move into a home, whatever the case may be.
Whatever it is.
I know we can solve this if we're all paying attention. So thank you very much, man. And thank you guys for watching.
Thank you for watching.
See you guys,
Be well.
we'll see you guys on the internet.